my dear friends, welcome back to the North Pole. Now, I must say I'm feeling extra jolly today. Now, do you know why? Well, it's because the Christmas season is in full swing. And let me tell you, it's a magical time here. But before I dive into today's tale, let me ask you. Now, I know you've all heard about those advent calendars. You've probably got one at home with the little doors with little treats hiding inside. I can imagine you all nodding. Now, let me tell you a secret about advent calendars. They're not supposed to be one-a-day treat, but oh, how often do I hear stories of little hands, and sometimes big ones, sneaking ahead, eating all the chocolate in one go. Naughty, naughty. Now don't worry, I won't tell. But here at the North Pole, we have an advent calendar too. Oh, but ours is no ordinary advent calendar. It's big enough to fill a room, with doors taller than an elf, each hiding something truly magical behind it. But as you might imagine, when something's as magical as that, it doesn't always behave quite the way it should. And that's where our adventure begins. So let me tell you about what happened yesterday. Now, yesterday was a day that everyone at the North Pole looks forward to all year. The grand unveiling of the North Pole Advent Calendar. Oh, this isn't just any Advent Calendar. No. It's far more magical than anything you've ever seen. Built centuries ago by the most skilled elves, it's designed to help us count down the days to Christmas in the most delightful way. Now, this calendar doesn't just have little chocolates or toys behind its doors. Oh no. Each day, when a door swings open, it reveals something enchanted. Something we need to make Christmas extra magical. I remember one year it gave us reindeer polishing cloths that made their antlers shimmer brighter than the stars. Another day, it revealed a tray of cookies that baked themselves. So you can imagine the excitement yesterday morning as the elves gathered around for this year's unveiling. The calendar stood in the center of the square, towering over everyone. Its golden frame sparkling in the sunlight. The snow around it was freshly swept, and garlands of holly and candy canes hung from the edges, giving a truly festive feel. Tootle, one of the proudest elves you'll ever meet, has been chosen as this year's Advent Calendar keeper. Tootle is, well, not very tall. She's one of the shortest elves at the North Pole, and her height means she couldn't quite reach the highest of the doors without needing a ladder. She'd been practicing all week, standing in front of a mirror, rehearsing her announcements. When the time came, she stood before the calendar with a clipboard in one hand and a gleaming golden key in the other. "All right, everyone," she called out, her voice booming like a drum from little Tootle. "It's time to open the first door of the North Pole Advent Calendar." The elves cheered and clapped, their breath rising in little plumes of steam in the frosty air. Even the reindeer poked their heads out of the stables to see what the fuss was about. Tootle inserted the key into the first door, which is decorated with a glittering number 1. She turned the key, and with a soft click, the door creaked open. Inside, nestled on a velvet cushion, was a set of the most beautiful paintbrushes you've ever seen. Each brush sparkled as if dusted with stardust, and the handles glowed faintly with a golden hue. "Magical paintbrushes," Tootle announced, holding them up for everyone to see. "These will make every present look like a masterpiece." The elves oohed and ahed, already imagining how they could use the brushes to add extra sparkle to their work. Tootle was beaming with pride as she handed the brushes to Lenny, who couldn't wait to try them out in the wrapping station. The elves buzzed with excitement, and all seemed right in the world. "This is going to be the best December yet," Tootle declared. The elves cheered again, and everyone returned to their workstations with a renewed sense of joy. Tootle marked a little neat tick on her clipboard to note the success of the day. But as you may know, dear friends, when magic is involved, things don't always go as smoothly as planned. And as Tootle stood admiring her clipboard, a gust of wind swept through the square and, well, let's just say the gust carried more trouble than anyone could have imagined. Now, my dear friends, let me just tell you about Tootle. Despite her name, Tootle is actually one of the shortest elves in the North Pole. Oh, but don't let her height fool you. She's bursting with energy and determination and a knack for tackling big tasks. Her name is a bit of a joke, you see, but it's one she's embraced with pride. When Tootle was chosen to be the Advent Calendar Keeper this year, she was over the moon. It's not every day that an elf gets entrusted with such an important job. She might not be able to reach the tallest doors on her own, but that's never stopped her from doing her very best. If anything, she's known for finding clever ways to overcome challenges. Tootle spent weeks preparing for her big role. She practiced opening locks with a golden key, rehearsed how to make the announcements, and even made herself a special checklist for every door. She wanted to be sure that nothing, absolutely nothing, went wrong. Now, yesterday morning, as the elves gathered for the first day unveiling, Tootle stood in front of the Advent calendar, with her head held high. She wore a tiny red hat that sat slightly askew, making her look even smaller to the towering golden frame of the calendar. So as the elves dispersed, Tootle lingered by the calendar, admiring its intricate design, its golden frame shimmering in the sunlight, and the holly garlands swayed gently in the breeze. Each door was a tiny work of art, painted with swirling frost patterns and glittering numbers. She noticed a patch of frost forming along the very top of the frame. To most, it would seem insignificant, but to Tootle, who took great pride in her role, it felt like something she couldn't leave alone. She thought, tilting her head. The calendar has to look perfect. Just a little clean-up, and I'll be ready for tomorrow. Tootle fetched a broom from the storage shed, and being as resourceful as she is, dragged a small crate over to give herself a boost. Balancing carefully, she reached up to sweep away the frost. But here's where things took a turn. As Tootle stretched just a little too far, the broom handle nudged the golden lock mechanism on the side of the calendar. Now at first she didn't notice. She gave the frost a few more sweeps and about to hop down when she heard a clink, clang, crack. Tootle froze. Slowly she climbed off the crate and looked down. Her eyes widened as she saw what had happened. The golden lock mechanism had fallen to the ground in pieces, its delicate gears and shimmering frame now scattered in the snow. "Oh no," she whispered, kneeling to pick up the pieces. This can't be good." She carefully gathered the broken parts and inspected the calendar. Without the lock, the golden key wouldn't fit and the doors wouldn't budge. The magic of the calendar was frozen, and the next day's gift was trapped inside. Tootle's heart sank. She imagined the disappointment faces of her fellow elves when the next door wouldn't open. This was her responsibility, and now it felt like she'd let everybody down. Now, my friends, Tootle may be small, but her determination is as big as they come. She wasn't about to give up, even if the situation seemed hopeless. But sometimes even the most resourceful elves need a little help. And that's where the next part of our story begins. There was Tootle standing in the snow with the broken pieces of the Advent calendar's golden lock cradled in her small hands. The square around her, so full of excitement and life earlier that morning, was now quiet, save for the soft whisper of the wind. The calendar itself stood tall and unyielding, its golden doors glittering in the pale light, as if mocking her predicament. At first, Tootle didn't move. She stood frozen, staring at the lock pieces, willing them to magically reassemble themselves. But of course, they didn't. The truth of the situation began to sink in. The lock was broken. The magic that powered the calendar was now stuck, and no amount of staring was going to fix it. She looked around, hoping no one had seen what had happened. Her cheeks burned red, not from the cold, but from a creeping sense of panic. What would the other elves think, she wondered. Being chosen as the Advent Keeper was such a big honour. Tootle had been determined to show everyone that she could handle the responsibility. "Oh, no, 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 no," she muttered under her breath, pacing back and forth in front of the calendar. She turned the broken lock pieces over in her hands, examining each little gear and hinge, hoping for some kind of solution to jump out at her. "Maybe I can fix it myself," she thought. But no matter how she tried to fit the pieces back together, they refused to cooperate. It was like trying to put together a puzzle without knowing what the final picture was supposed to look like. You see, Tootle, small in stature, but very big in heart, and sometimes that big heart leads to take on more than she should by herself. At that moment she thought, this is my responsibility. I should be the one to fix it. But the more she tried, the more impossible it seemed. Her mind started to race. If the calendar stayed broken, the elves wouldn't be able to open the next door. And if they couldn't open the door, they wouldn't get the magical item that they needed to keep things running smoothly. What if this ruined the whole month of preparations? What if the nice list checks fail? What if the toys didn't get finished on time? What if Christmas itself is ruined? Her pacing quickened, and she nearly tripped over on her own feet in the snow. "I can't let that happen," she whispered. She clutched the lock pieces tightly, her tiny fingers trembling. The weight of it all felt so heavy. At that moment, she felt a lump rise in her throat. She thought about keeping the whole thing a secret. Maybe if she didn't tell anyone, she could stall for time and come up with a solution on her own. But as soon as the thought crossed her mind, she shook her head. "No," she said firmly. "That's not the North Pole way. If there's a problem, we fix it together." With a deep breath, Tootle tucked the broken lock pieces into the pocket of her coat and stood up. Snowflakes swirled around her as she looked up at the towering calendar. But instead of letting it overwhelm her, she straightened her little red hat, adjusted her scarf, and squared her shoulders. "Okay," she said aloud, as if convincing herself. "I might not know how to fix this, but I know who might." Tootle began to think about the other elves. She thought about Lenny, who was known for his nimble fingers and his ability to craft the tiniest, most intricate details. If anyone could handle delicate pieces of a broken lock, it would be him. And then there was Tima, the librarian, who had a knack for finding exactly what you needed in the library's endless shelves. If there was a blueprint or a guide to fixing the advent calendar, Tima would know where to find it. Still, a part of Tootle hesitated. Asking for help wasn't always easy. She felt embarrassed, like she should have been able to handle it on her own. But deep down, she knew that the North Pole wasn't about doing everything by yourself. It was about working together. With a determined nod, she grabbed her clipboard and began marching towards the library, her boots crunching in the snow. So, my friends, Tootle set off to find her fellow elves, determined to put things right. Now, little did she know that the next part of her adventure would show her just how magical teamwork can be. Now, one of the most wonderful things about the North Pole is that no elf is ever alone in their troubles. Whether it's a stuck sleigh bell or a broken advent calendar, there's always someone ready to roll up their sleeves and help out. But for Tootle, asking for help didn't come easily. She had been entrusted with an important job. She trudged through the snow, the broken lock pieces jingling softly in her pocket. Snowflakes swirled around her, catching in her hair and sticking at the edges of her little red hat. Her boots crunched with every step, but her thoughts made far more noise. "What if they think I'm not good to be an advent calendar keeper?" she muttered to herself. "What if I've let everyone down?" But as she walked, a small voice in her heart reminded her of something she'd learnt long ago. The North Pole wasn't about doing things alone. It was about working together. Slowly, she started to think of who could help and fix the problem. Tootle quickened her pace, the towering library coming into view. Its frosted windows glowed warmly in the distance, and a puff of steam rose from its chimney. When she pushed open the grand wooden doors, she was met with the cosy smell of old books and a cheerful crackle of the library's central fireplace. Tima was perched high on a ladder, shelving books with his usual playful energy. When he spotted Tootle, he slid down the ladder with a grin, landing neatly on his feet. "Tootle," Tima said, brushing a few flakes of snow off the elf's shoulders. "What brings you here? shouldn't you be off preparing tomorrow's advent calendar door? Tootle hesitated, clutching the broken lock pieces in her hands. She looked down at them and then back at Tima. That's the problem, she said quietly. The lock is broken. I accidentally knocked it off the calendar, and now it won't open. Tima's smile didn't waver. Not for a second. Instead, his eyes sparkled with curiosity. The advent calendar lock, he said, leaning closer to examining the pieces. Oh, that's an interesting challenge. Now don't worry, Tootle. We'll figure this out. I think I know exactly where to start. Then Tima led Tootle through the towering shelves of the library, chatting animatedly as they went. You know, the advent calendar is one of the oldest magical artifacts in the North Pole. It was built by elf master Glimmer, a brilliant inventor, though a bit of a biscuit hoarder. Rumour has it there's a secret compartment in the calendar just for storing snacks. Now Tootle couldn't help but smile at Tima's enthusiasm. It lifted her spirits. It wasn't long before they reached the artifact section, where Tima pulled out a dusty scroll labelled North Pole Advent Calendar Original Design. He unrolled it carefully, spreading it out on a nearby table. Here it is, Tima said proudly, pointing to a detailed sketch of the lock mechanism. Now we just need someone with the right hands to put these pieces back together. Tootle's face brightened. Lenny, she exclaimed. Ah, Lenny. Oh, good old Lenny. Now, if you've ever received a Christmas present wrapped so beautifully that you didn't want to open it, there's a good chance Lenny was behind it. His hands are as steady as freshly fallen snow, and his eye for detail is second to none. With the blueprint tucked carefully under Tima's arm and the broken pieces in Tootle's pocket, the pair made their way to the wrapping station. The air grew warmer as they approached, filled with the scent of cinnamon and the soft rustling of ribbons. Lenny was busy at his workbench, surrounded by shimmering rolls of paper and towering piles of bows. He looked up as they entered, his warm smile lighting up the room. Tootle, Tima! What brings you to my little corner of the North Pole? Tima placed the blueprint on Lenny's workbench with a flourish. We've got a challenge for you, Lenny, he said, his tone playful but urgent. Tootle hesitated for a moment, then pulled the broken lock pieces from her pocket and placed them on the table. I broke the advent calendar lock, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I need help fixing it. Lenny picked up one of the pieces, turning it over in his hands with the same care he gave to a fragile ribbon. He murmured, his eyes scanning the blueprint. This is delicate work, but it's not impossible. With Tima's plans and my hands, well, I think we can make this happen. He looked at Tootle and smiled. And you, Tootle, will be the one to guide us. You know the calendar better than anyone. Where each piece goes, how it's supposed to work. What do you say? For the first time in a while, Tootle felt a spark of hope. Her friends didn't blame her or make her feel small. They made her feel capable. She straightened her little red hat and nodded firmly. I say, let's fix the calendar, she declared. And so, with the blueprint in hand, Lenny's nimble fingers ready to work, and Tootle guiding the way, the team set out to repair the advent calendar's magic. Little did they know, the adventure was just beginning. And so, dear friends, Tootle, Tima, and Lenny got to work. Determined to repair the advent calendar and restore its magic. The task ahead of them was no small feat. The advent calendar was no ordinary object. It was ancient, enchanted, and full of delicate parts that had to work perfectly in harmony. One wrong move could break the magic entirely. But if there's one thing that the North Pole elves are known for, it's their determination. Tootle, with her clipboard clutched tightly, watched as Tima carefully unrolled the blueprint on Lenny's workbench. The parchment was so old that it crackled faintly with every movement. Its edges were frayed, and faint golden runes glimmered along the borders, marks of the powerful enchantments used to create the calendar centuries ago. This is fascinating, Tima said. tracing his finger along the intricate lines of the blueprint. "Look here, this cog connects directly to the magical timing mechanism and this spring. It regulates the daily enchantment flow. Every piece is vital." Tootle peeked over Tima's shoulder, her brow furrowing. "I had no idea it was this complicated," she admitted. "I thought it was just a fancy lock." "Oh, it's much more than that," Tima replied with a grin. "The Advent calendar isn't just a tradition, it's a symbol of everything we stand for at the North Pole. Magic, teamwork, and a little bit of mystery." Tootle couldn't help but smile. Even though her heart was still racing with nerves, she glanced at Lenny, who was already inspecting the broken pieces of the lock. He had pulled out his special toolkit, a collection of tiny enchanted tools that sparkled faintly in the light. "All right," Lenny said, adjusting his magnifying glasses. "Let's start by figuring out what we've got here." He picked up one of the large gears, turning it over in his hands. "This one's intact," he said, setting it aside. Then he held up a small spring, bent almost into a knot. "But this little fellow has seen better days. I'll need to straighten it out before we can use it again." Tima pointed to a section of the blueprint. "That spring connects to the timing mechanism," he explained. "If it's even a tiny bit off, the doors might open at the wrong times, or not at all." Tootle felt a wave of guilt wash over her. "I can't believe I let this happen," she said quietly. Lenny paused, looking up from his work. "Hey now," he said gently. "Things go wrong sometimes. That's just how it is. The important thing is you're fixing it, and you asked for help, which is the smartest thing you could have done." Tima nodded in agreement. "Exactly, and besides, this is kind of fun. How often do we get to work on a magical artifact like this? Now, isn't it wonderful, my friends, how a bit of encouragement can make all the difference?" Tootle straightened her little red hat and nodded, her confidence returning. "Okay," she said. "What do we need to do next?" The three elves divided the tasks. Lenny focused on repairing the Brent spring, his nimble fingers working with a delicate precision. He used a tiny enchanted hammer to gently tap it back into shape, each tap accompanied by a soft and musical chime. Beside him, Tima carefully sorted through the other broken pieces, matching each one of its place on the blueprint. "Look at this," Tima said, holding up a small, intricately carved cog. "It has Elf Master Glimmer's signature etched on it. I think this connects to the enchantment that hums a tune when the last door opens." Tootle leaned closer, her eyes wide. "I didn't even know the calendar could do that." "There's so much more than meets the eye," Tima replied with a grin. "That's what makes it so special." As Tima and Lenny worked, Tootle made herself useful by carefully cleaning each piece before it was reassembled. She used a soft cloth to polish the tiny gears, watching as the dull metal regained its golden shimmer. "This gear goes here," Tima said, pointing to a section of the blueprint, "and this little lever connects to the spring Lenny's fixing." "Got it," Lenny said, placing the repaired spring back into its slot. He tightened a tiny bolt with his enchanted screwdriver, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration. You should have seen the teamwork, my friends. It was like watching a perfectly rehearsed dance. Each elf brought their own unique skills to the table, and together they worked as if they'd been doing it for years. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. At one point, a particularly stubborn hinge refused to stay in place. Lenny tried holding it steady while Tima adjusted the gears, but it kept slipping out of alignment. "This piece is trickier than a wrapped rocking horse," Lenny muttered, frowning. Tootle stopped frowning. Tootle stepped forward, her clipboard tucked under her arm. "What if we use a bit of magical wire to hold it in place?" she suggested. Tima's face lit up. "That's brilliant! Lenny, pass me the wire." With Tootle's quick thinking, the hinge was finally secured. Piece by piece, the lock began to come together. The golden gears clicked into place, and the tiny runes along the edges started to glow faintly. A sure sign that the magic was returning. Finally, after hours of careful work, Lenny placed the last piece into position. The lock gleamed under the warm light of the workshop. as perfect as the day it was made. "All right," Lenny said, stepping back. "It's ready." Tima handed the golden key to Tootle, her eyes sparkling. "Go on," he said. "You're the advent calendar keeper. You should be the one to test it." Tootle's hands trembled as she took the key. Slowly, she inserted it into the lock and turned it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft whir, the gears began to turn. "We did it!" Tootle exclaimed, her face beaming with pride. "No," Lenny corrected with a grin. "You did it, Tootle. You knew who's to ask for help and kept us on track. That's what made this possible." And you know what, my friends? Lenny was absolutely right. Tootle learned that asking for help isn't a weakness, it's a strength. And in the end, the advent calendar wasn't just repaired, it was a little bit more magical than ever before. And so, my friends, the North Pole advent calendar was saved. But the magic of the story isn't just in glowing ornaments or the golden lock. It's in the lessons that Tootle learned, the teamwork that made it all possible, and the joy that spread through the elves as the second door would open the next day. But let me tell you how the day wrapped up, because, oh, what a wonderful ending it had. When the golden lock clicked back into place, ready to open the second door, it wasn't just the advent calendar that seemed to come back to life, it was Tootle's confidence. She stood there staring at the lock, its gentle glow reflecting in her wide eyes. "We did it," she whispered, her voice full of wonder. "I couldn't have done it without you all," she said, looking from Lenny to Tima. "Thank you for believing in me." But of course, no adventure from the North Pole is complete without a little bit of mischief, and that's where Bixby and Biscotti come in. While the elves have been busy celebrating, and Tootle and Tima and Lenny had been busy repairing the lock, those two troublemakers decided to investigate the advent calendar for themselves. Bixby, the younger and bolder of the pair, climbed onto the base of the calendar, his curly tail twitching with curiosity. Biscotti, ever the wise, stayed a few paces behind, her eyes half-lidded as if to say, this won't end well. Sure enough, Bixby spotted one of the glowing ornaments still nestled inside the door. Thinking it might make the perfect toy, he reached out a paw and gave it a gentle tap. The ornament rolled to the edge of its compartment, wobbling precariously before falling with a soft plop in the snow. Bixby chirped, pouncing after it, but as he did, he tangled himself in the garland hanging from the calendar's frame. Before anyone could stop him, he was dangling from the side like a furry bauble, his curly tail swishing wildly. Tootle turned just in time to see the chaos. "Bixby!" she cried, rushing forward. Biscotti, watching from the sidelines, let out an exasperated sigh. With the grace of a cat who's seen it all, she padded over, swatted at the garland with one paw, and freed Bixby with a single well-aimed flick. Bixby tumbled into the snow, blinking up at Biscotti with wide, innocent eyes. Biscotti gave him a long, unimpressed stare before turning and sauntering away, her tail held high in triumph. Those two. They may be mischievous, but they're as much a part of the North Pole as the elves and the reindeer. And if there's one thing they teach us, it's that even the smallest creatures can add a little sparkle to our lives. And so, the day ended with laughter, joy, and a little extra glitter on the snow. Tootle went to bed that night, feeling something she hadn't felt that morning. Pride. Not just in her role as the Advent Calendar Keeper, but in her friends, her team, and the North Pole itself. It's days like these that remind us what Christmas is all about. It's not just the presents or the lights, it's the way we come together, even when things go wrong. It's the way we lift each other up and remind each other of the magic we carry inside. So as we head into tomorrow, remember this: no matter how small you feel, no matter how big the problem, there's always someone ready to stand by your side. And that's a kind of magic no Advent calendar could ever hold. Until next time, children, enjoy your Advent calendars, and goodbye.